Live from our studio in a basement down an alley downtown. It's 5:08, a show about Worcester. It is June the 8th, 2018. And our panel today is potentially you listening at home live. You can call in at 508-471-5265. How you doing, Brendan Melican?
I'm just curious, where would you be if not on the radio?
I don't know. Friday afternoon, I have no idea. This morning I was at the Worcester Historical Museum doing research. Maybe I would still be there doing research.
Okay. I would like to point out this is our first time doing a show on a Friday. Usually we're following up Walter Bird. He's very neat, cleans up after himself afterwards. Now we just followed up these two fools from Worcester Magazine, Josh and Bill. The table is covered with all of these pens from banks. I don't know what these guys have going on during the day, but if there's anybody in white-collar crime with the Department of Justice paying attention to the show, probably not. You probably want to keep an eye on these two.
Today, Brent crude oil is $77 a barrel, up 1% on the week, and Bitcoin is $7,600, essentially unchanged this week. You're listening to Unity Radio, broadcasting with 100,000 milliwatts of power on 102.9 FM, streaming at worcestermag.com, and cablecasted at WCCA-TV 194, and podcasted at pieandcoffee.org, and live streamed to our Facebook page.
Get a whole one person watching.
Thanks to Gabrielle Powers, the mighty Gabrielle Powers, and also Ben for engineering today's show.
No Hank Stoltz.
No Hank today. We should probably start off. This should be the apology show. Start off apologizing to everyone who tuned in thinking they were going to get something else.
Whatever you thought you were getting, it ain't that. So yeah. Welcome.
I don't know what's going on this week, Brendan. It's not a Tuesday, so there's no city council meeting tonight. And the city council agenda won't be announced till like 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
So I sort of feel, what would I be doing Friday afternoon is just sort of zoning out, watching TV, waiting for the city council agenda to go live.
Okay. We can make stuff up. What do you predict will be on the city council agenda next week?
It doesn't matter. It looks like many of the subplots from the spring of this year are kind of resolving at the city council. We had the flavored tobacco regulation thing.
You know what? I'm gonna make a prediction.
Yeah.
99 million people are going to show up at City Hall and go absolutely bonkers about the reality that Notre Dame Church is likely to come down.
Oh, right, because this week the mayor was like, the city's not going to spend $10 million.
Yes. Which is kind of funny. I was watching, I think it might have even been yesterday, I was watching Walter's program, and there was like a breaking news sort of thing, because Nick Katsopoulos had made mention about it. And this is how I think like breaking news is kind of funny in Worcester. It was the day before I was driving by, and all the lifts were up in front of the church, and they were clearly like moving things out from the inside, and they were clearly getting ready to staging to get the windows out and whatnot. And I'm like, oh, well, looks like that's that. It was kind of funny that, I think anyone who just popped over in the 24 hours or so before that announcement probably could have just talked to a construction worker and say, yeah, we're getting ready to take it down. Good luck with that.
This gets back to something which we frequently discuss with the late Jeff Barnard at the top of the show, which is that there's probably no top story this week in Worcester. I feel like this is a week. I feel like this is a week where certain things have resolved, but like plot-wise, there's no new exciting subplots. There's no new exciting characters in public life in Worcester. All of us are living our own lives, which are an amazing adventure, so much better than public life in Worcester. But in the public life in Worcester story, soap opera, no new subplots this week, no new characters. Gary Rosen's evil twin was not like come back from the dead because we thought he died in a plane crash.
That we're aware of.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like he probably came back from the dead, but we won't find out till like next week. This week there's kind of nothing going on.
We should probably make mention too that Gabriella, we're terrible with time. We're rarely paying attention to anything, so please make sure just like wave your arms around if you need us to stop talking, because in all likelihood we'll just ruin all of the station's plans for taking in revenue and whatnot.
I feel like honestly the top story this week is something which we probably cannot talk about a lot because it's a crime thing, and we usually don't have much to say about crime, and also our attitude tends to be a poor attitude, which is usually never the attitude that you should approach when discussing tragic events.
Sure.
But like basically, I think the top story this week is similar to the top story last week. Last week, our top story was that we had the first homicide of the year, and this year the news is that we basically had the second homicide of the year. The person, I guess, technically dying in Holden, but dumped as they were dying just over the Holden line to die in Holden, and which is bizarre. But basically, it's Worcester's second homicide of the year.
You and I were talking about this. One of the things that I found really odd about this story had nothing to do with the story itself. It was more of like a self-awareness sort of thing. So I live essentially on the Worcester version of the street leading into where this young person's body was found. Mm-hmm. And all the news stories, especially Boston news stories, were referring to the area as a remote section. You should stop doing that.
Yes.
A remote section of Worcester, and it was kind of a weird realization to wrap my head around that I still live
in
a
remote part of Worcester.
But can there be such a thing? It's the second largest city in New England. It's like saying it's a remote section of Central Park in New York, right? I mean, it's like it's still in a giant metropolis. You can't be remote.
Yeah, Worcester's a bit of a complicated city population distribution-wise, and so maybe you need to refer to it as something. You need to somehow characterize that this is not like downtown Worcester or the highway or whatever people think of when they think of Worcester.
Could just say Holden.
I feel like maybe this week's thing is like, maybe this week's theme is the meaninglessness of statistics or the complexity of statistics. And the need for interpretation and deep understanding. Like one of the articles that I looked at this week and printed out was something by Nick Kotsopoulos at the TNG, which is called 8 Worcester Incidents in 2017 Were Labeled Hate Crimes. And most of them were against the police, I guess. 5 of the 6 of the 8 incidents were involving a victim who was a police officer. So we had 8 hate crimes in 2017. 6 of them police hate crimes, which just sort of makes me feel like I don't know if this statistic is actually helpful. I mean, maybe the reality is we have so few hate crimes that it's like an amazing thing, like just like we have very few murders in Worcester, but more likely it's that like hate crime reporting is this strange thing which police arresting somebody are likely to check that box on the form, and that under normal circumstances, whenever you've been victimized or whatever, you're usually not going to go into all the enough detail that the officer is going to note that there was some racial whatever.
Can you just clarify for me that you're saying that the hate crimes were directed at police officers? So
yes.
The police were the victims of the hate crime?
Yes. And this is, again, speaking of statistics, this is from a report presented to the Human Rights Commission on Monday. And none of this information ever makes it online. Like none of these PDFs ever make it online that I can tell. So I've emailed the Human Rights Commission today trying to get this. So we may discuss this in more detail next week. We'll get an actual thing. But this is from Tiana M. Antul, Principal Crime Analyst for the Police Department. Ms. Antul emphasized that 6 of the 8 incidents that were reported as hate crimes involved a victim who was a police officer. And 5 of the 6 incidents targeting officers involved racial bias, while another involved an alleged sexual orientation bias.
Okay, so that makes sense. The way you first presented that, I was wondering if somehow the city had dug up some special designation for police officers that they were somehow covered under the ADA, or there was like a sub-demographic
that insulting somebody because they're a cop is itself a hate crime. Calling somebody a pig would be a hate crime under this. I mean, it would be a potentially hateful thing, but
that's actually covered under the First Amendment. Yeah.
But anyway, so I guess
thank you for clarifying.
I guess we'll talk for a couple more minutes and then go to a break. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I just to talk about things in the remote past that have nothing to do with news in Worcester today. One of the things that I was researching this morning at the Historical Museum was the famous Worcester anti-Klan riot of 1924, October 18th/19th, 1924, because it was like an all-night riot.
Fantastic moment in Worcester history.
Yeah, this is a 15,000 person event. This riot, mostly anti-Klan people in this riot.
Before you go too deep down this road, can you just? I want you to try and focus on one component of this, because it's always part of the lore that was explained to me, and I've never actually spent some time researching this. But it was always my understanding
the airplane thing or the Swedish thing.
Neither.
Okay.
No,
the third thing.
This was one of the first instances in Worcester where the Irish Catholic population and the Italian Catholic population actually kind of came together for the unified cause of running the Klan out of the city of Worcester. That prior to that, there was a lot of animosity between the Irish and the Italians, but their shared Catholicism and the Klan's hatred of Catholicism or bigotry towards Catholicism was one of the early things to actually unite the Italian and the Irish populations in the city.
This is why I'm doing research on this, because I'm looking for primary sources on this stuff. For example, one of the things that I found had a clipping from 1919 in the newspaper about the Tuesday Afternoon Girls Club at the Quinsigamond Branch Library, which is a thing where 5 or 6 little Swedish girls told stories or learned about baking or something with an adult present, and they had a nice little article about this. And I cannot figure out why this is like in the KKK section of the historical museum. I'm going to guess that some of these little girls grew up to be important Klan figures, and I just haven't made that connection yet.
All right.
This is the level of research that I'm trying to do, though. Like, understand the origins of, like, what was Swedish life like in Worcester in the 20s?
Yeah.
What was Italian? I mean, I know from, like, the, whatever you want to call it, like oral history, the conventional wisdom that this was like an important moment. But I can't actually find anybody running the numbers on this, or even anybody's memoir where they say that this was true. That would be proof enough for me.
Oh, totally. It's always struck me as one of those really good examples, if you can get to the bottom of this mystery, a really good example of the idea that there's nothing better to unite folks, especially if they view themselves as being on separate teams, than a common enemy, right? I've always been a big fan of the Gene Roddenberry idea that we really just need aliens to show up, and then humanity will be cool with each other.
Well, until that happens, this is 508, Worcester's Antifa Voice. We'll be back in a moment with more.
Yeah, so there's really not much down there?
There's more than you would find in the clipping section at the library.
You know who
right back. I'm just going to run out.
Oh, take your time. You know who I bet could point you in the right direction on that one? That would actually be a good source?
Who's that?
Monsignor Scollins. I bet the Catholic Church has, because again, whether my whole, the lore that was passed to me, the idea that it was one of those few times that fractions of the Catholic Church kind of came together as this unified front to battle the Klan, if you will. Mm-hmm. If there's anybody that's going to hold on, that would have any documentation on that, it probably would be the local diocese. Because again, that's also part of the story that's always been told to me too, from old-timers and whatnot, including some people that were at least alive in that time frame. Because that's something I remember my grandparents talking about and whatnot, was and great-grandparents on my mother's side who lived in Worcester at the time, that it was something that was actually organized by the church. In many
it was definitely, there was in looking at the statistics of how many people were in the Klan, there were people, including one guy anonymous guy identified as a Knights of Columbus member, who had city directories, phone books or whatever, from 1924, 1923, 1925, where they would mark off who these are Klans people. And so one of the researchers who's done research into this, that's how he built his list of who was in the Klan in Worcester in 1925, was going by anti-Klan organizers who had really good records.
Yeah. Well, and if there's anybody we know who keeps great records, it's the Catholic Church.
It is the Catholic Church. I will have to ask about that.
Yep.
You want to talk about Twin Peaks for a second? Are we coming back, or are we gonna?
You still have a couple more breaks.
Groove a little bit more on this.
About 80 more seconds.
Well, you haven't seen the new Twin Peaks, have you?
I haven't seen the old Twin Peaks.
Well, I'll give you a spoiler for the new Twin Peaks, is that there's one scene where it's a long shot of a guy sweeping up the floor of the roadhouse, sweeping up cigarettes and peanuts and whatever. While the bartender sort of stands in the corner, and it's just a 2.5 minute shot of a dude sweeping the floor while Green Onions plays.
Really?
Yeah, and it's a really bold. I was watching a video this morning that was characterizing it as, in its own way, kind of the boldest moment of all of Twin Peaks, just because it's even outside of the normal kinds of weirdness of the show, which seem to have some narrative purpose or goofy purpose or whatever, where it's just like somebody being like, here it is. This person's interpretation that it was about someone's attempt to sweep up, the debris of this sordid place, to sweep up evil in the world, to try to maintain something against the corruption of the world, but realizing it's an endless task.
Could just play Booker T the whole show. That'd probably be just as entertaining, though.
It was 30 seconds.
It was a cool moment. It was a cool moment of the new Twin Peaks. I wasn't 100% into the new Twin Peaks, but I was into that moment.
Yes, again, still haven't seen the old one. We'll get there sooner or later.
Good show.
It's a long list.
Show. One of the best. I think we should have. We'll just say this to the people at home. I think we should have Katie Burt back on in a couple weeks, because I do want to talk about Worcester as narrative. And this week she's at the Austin Television Festival interviewing all of your TV favorites.
You got it.
All right, whenever you guys are ready.
Thrill of a lifetime. Get your ticket and come in. Killers of the Amazon can devour a cow in a matter of seconds, can leave nothing but the bare bones. First time shown in your city, and you may never have the chance to see it again. Alive, alive, alive. The deadly piranhas. $10,000 reward, if not absolutely alive, never before shown, and you may never again have the chance to see it again. The most terrifying flesh eaters from the deep. Brendan Malick and myself, Michael Benedetti, and you at home who can call in live at 508-471-5265. I want to mention the Swedes and the airplane stuff. I don't know what we're talking. I mean, do you care about enough about this that we should talk about it for 5 more minutes?
Does this have to do with the Klan?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I have no idea what you're talking about.
All right. So the Swedes. So you were talking about the at this point I'll consider it a legend because I haven't nailed it down exactly. The legend that this anti-Klan movement was this thing which really like built a lot of connections between the Italian American and the Irish American communities in Worcester. Part of it, which is not a legend, is that the Klan in Worcester was largely a Swedish organization. A lot of Swedish immigrants, which it was sort of a unique Klan movement in that the Klan was generally against all immigrants, basically. In this case, it was like, no, the Swedes are good. The Swedes are, they're Nordic. They're like on the cover of metal albums.
I guess if you're going to be a bigot, right, like you got to draw a line somewhere, especially in a country that's totally made up of immigrants. Like you just got to pick a time frame or a point of origin and say, okay, these people are cool. It's everybody else we get a problem with.
Well, I'll tell you. So in 1924, I guess this is from an old paper by Kevin Hickey, who was going by records of the Klan itself as well as records of anti-Klan activists who had kept records from those days, looking at the number of Swedes who were involved in this, Swedish immigrants and other Swedish people, that 10% of the people in Worcester were Swedes at the time, and that 50% of the Klansmen in Worcester were Swedes at the time. 62% of the Klansmen worked at Norton.
Really?
Yeah. Like, I don't know what percentage of Worcester's workforce worked at that one facility and say in the early 20s, but...
Well, it's kind of in a weird way a reverse statistic too, because I'm sure there was a large population just in general from the county working there, right?
So it wasn't like 60% of the people at Norton were Klansmen.
Yeah, I just want to make sure you clarify that
were Norton. Right. I mean, I'll say it this way: that there was about 3,000 Klans people at the time.
Yeah.
So 60% of 3,000 is like 1,800.
There was probably some pamphlets being handed around at Norton Company. Is what you're saying. Yeah.
30% of you could also look at the statistic this way: is that he found out that 30% of the Klansmen in the city of Worcester were Swedes who worked at Norton, or about 900 people.
All right.
Yeah. So there you go. The other thing is that you know the airplane legend around this.
I know nothing about the airplane legend. That's why I've said this to you twice now.
I feel like this is
for the story.
See, so you know the Irish Catholic lore around this. The piece of lore that I
know a bunch of stuff that my grandfather probably made up.
There you go. You go. See, so whenever I hear people talking about this, the thing that they mostly mention is that somebody shot a Klansman's airplane out of the sky. And so, and if any recent articles that you read about this, they always say there's a debunked rumor that was going on at the time. Definitely debunked rumor that a Klansman's airplane had been shot out of the sky. And but the thing is, it's like the most vivid thing of the entire story, basically. Sure. So it's the kind of thing where it's hard to even write an article about it because what people will remember is that story, and they may or may not remember that it's debunked. Right. The word debunked may or may not stick in their memory. So 5 years later, they're telling the story, and they're like, yeah, I think somebody's airplane was shot out of the sky. And people are like, that's badass.
Except, I think there's some context that needs to come in play there, too, though, where, if you're thinking of an airplane today, right, we're not talking about a Klansman in 1920.
This is a little biplane or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially a paper plane with a guy with a leather cap and goggles and a big ascot flowing behind him. That would be essentially the plane, right?
Well, I want to point the finger at that Bircher rag, the telegram. At the time, pre-Bircher, but I'm sure Bircher and Spirit Rag, the telegram.
Maybe this is what converted them.
In the article, so this riot was happening the night of the 18th of October, a Saturday night riot, and the morning of the 19th, a Sunday in October. And in the Sunday evening issue of the telegram, they had a picture of the plane. They had a thing about how the plane was shot down. They had denials from the pilot of the plane that it was shot down. But the caption of the plane was like, "Here is the plane that was shot down." So this is a rumor which started from like ground zero of this, information-wise.
And you haven't confirmed whether or not that actually took place.
It definitely didn't take place.
Really?
This is universally considered to not have taken place.
So it was just an accidental crash landing of a Klansman in a paper plane?
So this is a Klansman who was flying to this like 5,000 person Klan rally in Worcester. And
so what kind of anti-aircraft guns did Worcester folk in the 1920s have that they were taking out planes?
So he like had some kind of like a kink developed in the fuel line or something. So he decided to set down on the shores of Lake Quinsigamond, which is not where you're supposed to land your plane. But he landed
You're not
short
even
of
supposed to swim there now.
He landed short of the airport or wherever the heck you're supposed to land back in the day. And the newspaper people, of course, ran over there to see what was going on. And there was a hole in the guy's airplane. And the guy was like, that hole's been there for a while. But the newspaper was like, we don't believe this guy. We definitely think his plane was shot down. But like, historians do not believe that happened.
Oh, really? Okay.
That it doesn't make any sense that somebody shot down a plane.
It kind of does make sense that somebody could shoot down an old plane like that, though, right? I mean,
well,
it also doesn't make sense that we just take the word of a guy who presumably came here for nefarious purposes too. Like, if I'm sure that same Klansman in the same interview probably said, "I wasn't in Worcester to spread bigotry and hatred amongst people. Like,
right.
We're just here to, I don't know, hand out our pamphlets and whatnot." Like,
I'll point out that on the recruiting flyer that you would get for the KKK that somebody would give you, that you would then fill out your information. One of the questions on there was, "Are you a white supremacist?" Or
at least they're a little bit more forward.
Or I would say, do you believe in white supremacy? So again, there are many people in the late 70s. There were people being interviewed in the TNG about this who were like, it wasn't an anti-black or whatever, anti-Jewish, anti-whatever organization. It was like a pro, but it like had it on the paper, like, are you a white supremacist? Do you believe in white supremacy? So like there was nothing magically happy and nice about the Worcester Klan. It was just as gross as the Klan anywhere else. I mean, this is why I like to do primary research, though, because like I'll say, God bless Al Southwick, God bless his little heart. Like, I've learned so much about Worcester from him.
Sure.
I have learned also that about 10% of what he says about Worcester is not true.
Did you say Al Southwick has a small heart?
His big heart.
Oh, right.
He has a little heart because he's, I'm thinking of him as like a little person.
I don't know if it was an insult or like you're pointing on an anatomical flaw.
His heart is like 3 sizes too large.
Okay.
Like, Al Southwick is a great guy. But one thing I've realized is that if you go back at the primary sources, that for example, Thomas Wentworth Higginson did not invent Christmas as it's currently practiced in Worcester, despite Al Southwick's repeated insistence that he did. No evidence of this, misreading of the primary sources. Same way,
I thought that was the guy who ran the private investigation firm in Hawaii.
No, that's the guy. You're thinking of Magnum PI, Thomas Magnum.
But who was his boss? Higgins.
The British guy.
Yeah.
I thought the guy was like a waiter or something. I never really watched that show.
Okay.
But Thomas Wentworth Higginson was the guy who helped. He didn't help run.
You're getting Higgins confused as Captain Stubing, Mike. That's the problem.
He did. Thomas Wentworth Higginson, who was also Emily Dickinson's best friend and published her stuff kind of against her will after she died. Higginson was not the guy. He wasn't a prominent abolitionist. He was not the guy who led the riots against U.S. Marshals when they came to Worcester to seize fugitive slaves. He was the guy who escorted U.S. Marshals out of Worcester so that they would not be killed by unruly mobs on the streets. That's the thing that we should read one of these stories. There's a great story about it.
You're going to have to now. You just confused me. I have no idea what you're talking about.
One of the Worcester newspapers. There's a guy, Asa Butman, who was a U.S. Marshal who would come to Worcester to seize fugitive slaves. The Worcester newspaper at the time did not refer to him as U.S. Marshal. No, it just referred to him as the notorious kidnapper Asa Butman came to Worcester last week to seize fugitive slaves. And it only ever referred to him as the kidnapper Butman. It never referred to him as U.S. Marshal, though that's what he was. Because I just love that total political bias. This is just as like there was like Worcester newspaper which never referred to Joe Petty as the mayor. It was just like that dirtbag Petty, and they assume that he's the mayor. But they're like, we're not going to dignify him with that term. They at one point, so Higginson and a few other abolitionists in Worcester were like, we need to get this guy out of town because he came to town. People found out he was staying in a hotel. They like surrounded the hotel. They were going to burn it down. And Higginson was like, I'm against slavery, but this is probably going to get out of hand. So they're escorting him out of town, and like as they come around the corner where the courthouse is, this newspaper story tells this very vividly. Like this big black dude just comes from around the corner and just like punches Asa Butman like right in the side of the head, and like knocks him out. And
didn't that take place at the building like right next door where Dead Horse is?
I think so. Yeah.
The hotel where
this was like right around. This was like right around there. Anyway, stories from Worcester back in the day. Stories from my childhood, Brendan.
Yeah. Now can we talk about fantastic mustaches from the late 70s, early 80s?
I don't want to. I would rather talk about Tom Selleck than talk about Star Wars.
All right.
I don't know.
Where are we at?
Do we have a phone call? Or we just need to stop talking? All right. We need to just stop talking.
We'll take a break.
This is 508, Worcester's week-by-week good faith survey of evidence. We'll be back in a moment with more.
No idea what you're talking about.
Magnum PI? What are you talking about?
No, I was talking about Magnum PI. You were talking about we got 4 people listening to that.
I know. Did I tell you that I was reading a book out called Boston Noir?
No.
It's a great book. None of this noir extends out to Worcester, but it's very
it's like nice to read, crime stories in general, but whenever you've been to the place, I feel like there's always a little extra something. Like once you've been to San Francisco or once you've been to LA, suddenly like those West Coast noir stories make a little bit more sense. Or if you've been to New York and they're talking about going below 14th Street or whatever, you know what they're talking about a little bit more. It's nice. It's nice to read Boston.
Is there more file up for you to look at the Historical Museum about the riot though, or did it seem kind of bare?
There's a couple of articles. There was from the Worcester Sunday Post.
Okay.
And the Telegram, there's both articles in the days leading up to it and the days leading away from it, which I haven't read all of them. I've skimmed them because right now I'm just sort of trying to get my laundry list of stuff. I do feel like the Catholic Church is the way to go because the gut feeling of other people I've talked to about this is that there's got to have been like an Irish paper in Worcester or something, right?
Right.
And like that would be the interesting. That would be a really interesting perspective to see about this stuff.
I bet you could find some old-timers somewhere who are retired as priests or whatever that are kicking around that could probably paint a picture there.
Yeah. And I would like to figure out exactly why people don't consider the shooting down a plane story to be legit. Because maybe it's the debunking that needs to be debunked. I'm totally open to that too.
Maybe it just doesn't seem realistic to a person that you could shoot down a plane, but it doesn't really seem like that crazy of a concept if you know how both a rifle works and an old plane works.
I'll talk to a guy I know who's a private pilot and ask him.
Yeah,
he's not an expert in planes of the 20s, but I think would have a sense.
Thing too is you're also talking about something that's moving slower than it's not moving much faster than your average car, right? Planes didn't move very fast at the time.
Yeah.
So
I don't know. I haven't found the whatever where anybody decides to debunk this.
Yeah,
it may just be that people are like, this seems unbelievable, ridiculous. Anyway, but it was spread from the very beginning. That's the kind of stuff I like to figure out. It's like, where did this rumor start? Well, this is where it started. There's nothing earlier than this.
I was hoping you were going to say that the plane went down in somewhere out in Leicester, and there was some lore attached to it about Klan treasure that was lost out in the woods of Leicester.
No, there's nothing good like that.
What do you get next?
I don't know. We can talk about a factory I was researching this morning.
A factory?
Oh, I thought that was... For some reason, I always think that's the music to come back in.
Well, they use the same music.
Yeah.
Well, it's a different song, but...
I can read... You looked at these old ads, right?
Yeah.
We could talk about old-timey stuff. We could talk about... I don't know. I was researching some old...
I think we should talk about how many 5-year-olds you could take in a fight.
Is this a legitimate thing?
Yeah.
I have so many papers here that we could talk about. The minimum wage, fringe benefits, and worker welfare. We haven't talked about that. No, not yet.
30 seconds.
30 seconds. Yeah, I don't know. What do I got? I got a business improvement district. I got minimum wage. This is old stuff from like May. I got housing stuff.
Whatever you've got just cost us 2 viewers on Facebook.
The Skybridge case. Did we talk about the Worcester Skybridge case?
Yeah, months ago.
We didn't talk about it, right?
Yeah, we did, months ago.
Oh, okay.
You're right.
Whenever you guys are ready, come in.
This is the water, and this is the well. Drink full and descend. The horse is the white of the eye, and dark within. This is the water, and this is the well. Drink full and descend. The horse is the white of the eye, and dark within. This is the water, and this is the well. Drink full and descend. The horse is the white of the eye, and dark within. And this is Brendan Melican, and I'm Michael Benedetti, and this is 508, a show about Worcester. You can call in live at 508-471-5265. Brendan Melican. You don't want to talk about the Skybridge thing, huh?
No, I want to know how many 5-year-olds you could take in a fight.
I don't know.
Gabrielle, how many 5-year-olds can you take in a fight?
Is this a Reddit thing? Is this a Star Wars thing?
No, that's ducks that's giant ducks or very small ponies.
But I can barely take my little sister in one fight, so probably one.
Unnamed person sitting next to Gabriella who just kind of showed up in the studio. 5-year-olds, how many do you think?
Say 4.
4. Okay, that's a good. No, so Mike, what I was getting at was, and I just noticed this in passing. I think it came out a couple days ago. Clive McFarland had a column recently.
Oh, right.
Talking about.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, no, I mean the crux of the column was discussing a recent case in the Worcester Public Schools where 2 preschoolers were disciplined for drawing a picture of a bomb. And, that in itself seemed absurd, but what really got absurd was the district spokesperson on safety stuff, Rob Bozzella, was kind of getting into the weeds on why we have to take things seriously, but put on his straight man act while he was going through this. And I just could not wrap my head around the idea. Let me say it this way. If you're working for an administration of the Worcester Public Schools and you're finding 5-year-olds to be that threatening, you're probably in the wrong line of work. And I'm not saying that every 5-year-old grows up to be a saint, right? That's cool. Lots of 5-year-olds grow up to be terrible people. But no matter what comes out of the head of a 5-year-olds are by definition clinically insane small people, right? That's what they are. So sometimes they do some weird things, including be creative and express themselves in ways that adults will look at and say, I have no idea what's going on here.
What is going on in this country, Brendan?
But what is going on in this city where we're disciplining 5-year-olds for drawing pictures?
So I'll tell you this, when I was 9 years old, I can tell you right now, I drew probably not 1,000 bombs a day at school, but I definitely drew hundreds of bombs a day at school.
Yeah, giant robots that were crushing things. There was explosions.
Drew more realistic. I feel like I usually drew more realistic military hardware.
Well, why are you not in prison yet, Mike? Why are we still allowing
Because I
you
grew
to
up in the lawless red state of Oklahoma.
Why are you still being allowed to participate in polite society?
I don't know.
It was such a bizarre column, though, and I really would encourage anybody who's at all interested in as a parent who's got a kid in the Worcester Public Schools, if you really, I think, want to get a sense of the mindset when it comes to school safety, there are so many great arguments to be made for improvements to and changes to the way we treat safety of young people in schools. Then there's just bizarro land, where you've got otherwise rational, well-thinking adults who take completely innocuous things that kids just do, and they find threatening things in it. And to me, that's far more terrifying than any terrible thing that could actually happen in a school, is when the leadership looks at young people and finds them to be the threat in general.
I mean, you know a little bit about education. Do you feel like a teacher has discretion on something like that, or that's the kind of thing where a teacher just has to cover their ass?
Well, that is where Clive was kind of getting in on things a little bit, was that a lot of this is the byproduct of zero tolerance policies. So it's, one of the examples they gave, and again, the school department justified its decisions on, a kid finding an empty shell casing from a bullet, whether it be an old rifle cartridge that grandpa brought home from the war, or something they just picked up on the road on the way to school, and then bringing it to school to show and tell, and talking about that is a mandatory suspension. We've been doing that for ages in Worcester now. But the thing is, that's a thing that can't possibly hurt anyone any more than another piece of metal, like my pen, right?
Yes, this has already been blown up. It can't blow up anymore.
This has lived out its useful life as a projectile, as an explosive device.
It's like the least explosive thing in the classroom potentially, because it's already exploded.
Yeah, no, it's no more dangerous than some change in your pocket or some paper clips. But just because of the context around it, right? It's related to a firearm, so
it was dangerous.
It was at one time dangerous. It will forever be dangerous. Man, this is the stuff that just bums me out about kids growing up today. It's not that they live in a more dangerous time, because they don't. It's not that they live in a scarier time, because they don't. It's really that they're surrounded by adults who are so crazy and paranoid that everything under the bed is going to destroy their lives, that they treat kids like the world is coming to an end, and it just doesn't seem very fun. So I'm sorry, kids. That's really all I wanted to get to, is I'm really sorry, kids.
I'm always on the side of the kids, man.
Yeah, and if you do find a spent bullet casing somewhere, you can actually make a kind of cool whistle out of those. So just don't bring it to school and show your friends.
One of my goddaughter's 4th birthday is coming up soon, and you know what I'm buying her?
What's that?
Pocket knife.
Nice, good for you.
Fixed blade.
Yeah.
A serious, dangerous-looking knife.
I just, I just built up a new bike with my son the other day, and it was opening packaging and whatnot. And it was so nice to see him pull out his Opinel number 8, and it was, but it was even nicer. I had to pretend otherwise, because I have to at least pretend to be a responsible adult in front of my son. But the blade was all burnt from where he was playing with it with fire, heating it up and using it to cut things. Just stuff you do as a kid, right?
Of course.
But that's stuff we did as a kid. It's stuff that my son does as a kid. It's stuff that your niece does as a kid. But a lot of kids don't get the opportunity to do that and just kind of play and explore things, break things, build things. Part of growing up.
Let me ask you, Brendan. Do you think, as you're a father, you're an experienced dad, do you think that for say a 4-year-old, a 4-year-old's not a toddler. 4-year-old's way past being a toddler. What do you call that age?
Preschool.
Tween?
I don't know. That's preschool. What you call a threat to the city of Worcester, who could draw a bomb that will blow up the city at any moment.
That's right. She should bring that to preschool. Do you think for a preschooler a small folding knife is better, or like a small fixed blade is better? I think the fixed blade, because I feel like it's less dangerous, but.
We've talked about this a bit. I was, I think, 5 or 6, I believe, when my grandfather gave me my first pocket knife, and it was one of those small like keychain. They used to have those little chrome plated things that they would have in like a cylinder jar sort of thing on the counter at CVS. Like it'd be like a nickel. The folding, but I still have the scar on this. Which finger is it? Yeah, right here. You can see the scar right on that knuckle there, and that's actually from the folding knife clamping down on my finger. So I don't know. I mean, this depends. Do you want to earn some scars, or do you want to be safe?
I mean, I feel like this kid is going to be heavily supervised, and that if she cuts herself, people are going to kind of be like, that's, you're paying the cost to be the boss. Like,
the only thing that I would point out there, and this is something I think about in hindsight whenever I notice that weird scar on my finger, is kids' fingers are really small. And it doesn't take much to just like lop one right off.
Right, it's like But kids also heal fast.
But the fingers don't grow back.
Oh, okay.
You only get one go at those digits. It's but yeah, I mean, in hindsight, I think I probably, without much effort, probably could have just clipped that end right off with a small pocket knife.
Brendan, I thought maybe I had my list of line items from the city 2019 budget with me, but I don't have it. But I don't have that printout anymore. I just have this boring thing that has graphs in it. Because I just wanted to loop back to something which you claimed that we talked about, which has stayed in my folder, so I'm doubtful. Which is from back in April, Worcester deciding to pay $12 million to settle this case where the city was supposed to build a sky bridge from a hotel. And for many decades, it feels like now. Oh, this is a 6-year-old lawsuit. It feels like longer than 6 years old.
Well, the plans came up, I think, before that. Okay. And then the lawsuit came up 6 years ago.
That the city was basically like, we're never gonna
We're paying $12 million to not build something. That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
That's a really bad idea. Like, it has to be a really terrible idea. If the city's just going to try and say, it's easier to just give you the money than build this horrible thing.
Somehow they thought it was going to be way cheaper. But this is like 2% of the city's annual budget in this settlement. So on the one hand, you could be like, oh, this is definitely enough to save Notre Dame. Like, this is potentially twice as much as you would need to save Notre Dame. But on the other hand, it's also
don't give anybody any ideas, Mike.
But you're also talking about 2% of the city's budget. So that's maybe the way to frame the Notre Dame thing. It's just to say, like, do you want the city to spend 1% of its budget this year to save this building? I don't know. Maybe. I mean,
if you had to choose between saving Notre Dame and a sky bridge, what would you go for?
Oh, I would say Notre Dame in a second over the sky bridge. Yeah, everybody has a sky bridge. Not that many people have like this sweet-looking church like right downtown in the middle of all this development. Like, I was just walking down. I was walking down, the new piece of Front Street the other day, and looking over the roofs of some of the new City Square development up at the Notre Dame Church, and just thinking, this is such a great view. It's really terrible that this is going to go away. Like, I understand that the fiscal reality that it's ridiculous to spend 2% of the city's budget saving one building.
Yeah, no,
but I wish.
That's the one thing that really bums me out about all this, I think, is that, besides the fact that I know decades from now our kids are all going to look at us and say, people are so dumb. But the thing that bothers me is we don't, as a city, have much of a skyline, if any skyline at all. And the things that do stand out as a skyline are pretty iconic. They're this, the bizarro mirrored glass tower that we have, that the peaks from Union Station.
The turtle boy doesn't count because it's too small.
You don't really see that
from the highway.
If you were flying over the city in your small Klan airplane, you might be able to see the Burnside Fountain. But otherwise, not going to notice that. But the church is one of those things that does kind of stand out on that side of the city, and it'll be missed on that front.
Brendan, here's another thing, which is my understanding of history, not backed up by any primary sources I've seen. My understanding of history is that many a town in medieval Europe or Renaissance-era Europe said, you know what, we've got a lot of money, we're really building up money, and it's a little bit hard to preserve wealth long-term in this world that doesn't have a great banking system, and in which, gold can get stolen easily and grain can go bad quickly. Like, what we should invest in is building the best church we can, even if it takes decades and decades, because if we plow our money into this, we will be a destination for years to come. And this will benefit our children, grandchildren, etc. And this has, I would say, in many cases proven out. Like, I wonder this is what I think that our grandchildren will say, looking back at losing Notre Dame, is saying like that actually would have been a reasonable 2% to spend, guys. Like stuff that you spent 2% on back in 2019, like of stuff that turned out to be a good idea long term, like that actually would have been up there.
Possibly, but I think that also, you're skirting over the fact that when it comes to churches, as say Notre Dame, that attendance is dropping. So unless you find a really good way to repurpose the building, that medieval mindset has probably gone by the wayside a little bit, and it's probably not the place to sink your money now. So
I got it. I got this idea. You ready? I haven't heard anybody say
Bitcoin might
this.
still be a better investment than new church.
Server farm or air conditioning HVAC system.
That would actually be cool.
That you just basically are like, we're going to preserve a shell, in some places just fiberglass or paper mache of this church, and inside we're going to totally gut it, and we're just going to use it as space for stuff that people don't want to look at.
I've seen some buildings. Someone I do business with actually has a building that's very similar to this. It's an old mill in Worcester County, and the old mill basement is still intact. But like when I say old mill, like water mill, right? So for milling grain.
Yeah.
So in the basement, you have along basically one long corridor. You've got the giant old millstone that was, turned by running water and whatnot. Next to that, you've got an old diesel locomotive engine that is what was replaced the old millstone when they basically stonewalled up over the place where the water came through, and replaced it with diesel power. And then just off to the side from that is a server farm. They lease out the basement now to outsiders who are just filled the place with racks upon racks of modern technology. And just walking into this space, you can see like 150 years of human ingenuity just sitting right there. And what's crazy about it is it's still like water leaking through the walls and whatnot, but everything drains perfectly so that the modern technology doesn't get damaged by it. Really cool stuff. So that I could actually get into.
I'm sorry I didn't ask Ted about this. How much would it cost to build a Disney-type structure?
How much would it cost to go to a break, Mike?
It would be free of charge to go to a break. I think everybody would really appreciate it. This is 508, Worcester's Libertarian Voice. We'll be back in a moment with more.
That's how you just saved the building. You know what we're going to do? We're going to put together a last-minute proposal to move the co-location center down the street next to the courthouse, the AT&T co-location center. We're going to move it over there. So instead of having this horrendous cube of a building,
crazy ugly building,
you probably could replace all of that technology with something that could fit in our pocket at this point. It might be a little warm, but it probably doesn't need to be that size of a building. Put it inside the church and just seal it up. Forget about it.
This is where I wish I knew something more about construction. Like, what do you build the outside of this church out of? Because you don't want to have to deal with maintaining these bricks long term. So is it like a plastic shell or something made of vinyl?
For what?
We're dealing with the outside of Notre Dame. The fact that you have this church, which is going to be super expensive to maintain long term. You just want this sort of what Disneyland would do.
It's not about, and I think that's part of the problem. And this is where, again, unpopular opinion, but I think a lot of the issue with the building still falls on the shoulders of the church, right?
Yeah.
The same goes for Mount Carmel. It's never an issue of what does it take to maintain this, right? Because that's like a short-term fix once you know there's a problem. Right. It's just like if you're a homeowner. If you own a brick chimney, you got to be up in your roof every year making sure it doesn't need to be repointed. And as soon as you notice it does, you have to take care of that, because by the time the next year comes around, that thing's going to be crumbling on you, and you're going to have all sorts of water infiltration issues. And that's what I think now the problem is, that ongoing normal maintenance is cost effective if your goal is to keep a building up and running. You never really you don't have a term like useful lifespan of a building, a well constructed building, when you're discussing when you at least have continuous maintenance. As part of the program.
It is a shame. I think my understanding I agree with you totally, which is these are parishes which I don't want to say that they should have known better, but I feel like the diocese and them together should have known better.
Yeah.
This should have been sort of like the priority every year, to be like, what your priority should be is that your building is falling apart.
Yeah.
Your church is falling apart. We're just on a road to this church falling down.
Yeah.
So I feel like every year for decades, this should have been the thing the parish council should have been talking about, which is
and
our
it's not like we're
buildings
talking about an organization that is new to the idea of
long-term
maintenance. So, somebody every once in a while must look up at the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel and say, hey, looks like we're going to have to do some touch-up work here.
Yeah,
it's time to call in the airbrushes.
I mean, not everybody gets this, and I understand, too, that parishes are frequently compartmentalized things so that everybody thinks that somebody's taking care of that angle, right? Like, you obviously are not ignoring that part, but I guess you can.
Awesome, thank you. Well, I have to imagine, too, that a lot of that probably less so than falls, I'm saying generally falls on the church or the diocese. I mean, I probably can make an argument that a lot of it falls on the individual parish priest as well, too, who, might be in there for whoever's really in charge of the building for a given period of time.
Yeah.
Yeah. They didn't really formally say, though, whether or not it was coming down.
What's that?
The building.
Oh.
That was jazzy, Mike.
Oh, this song again.
Everyone loves him. He's all alone in the world. His mother and father weighed several hundred pounds, but little Ernie was born to be a mini pig. No bigger than the palm of your hand, no larger than a telephone. Born to go through his entire life as a mini pig. Yes, the smallest pig in all the world, and he is here right now. Come in and see him now. Just 1 pound of bacon on the hoof. Alive and here now on the 508 show with Brendan Melican and Michael Benedetti.
Hanging on by a thread, Mike.
We're hanging in by a thread. Yeah, I don't know. I feel
awkward silence. Nothing makes radio better than awkward silence.
We were just talking more about church preservation over the break, and I feel like I want to tell more stories from my life. Tell stories of the time the church I went to in Manhattan was saved from the wrecking ball totally unexpectedly. But I don't want to tell that story, Brendan. I want to talk about Worcester.
Did they make any? So I read everything that I've read over the last 24 hours or so about the church. The one thing I wasn't able to really suss out was like, have they made any? Are they just knocking the thing down?
I guess.
Okay, because everything was framed around the idea from the mayor saying, well, there's nothing we can do. The city's not getting involved. But it didn't really take the extra step. It sounded very much like somebody smart in the mayor's office shied away from inserting any language or allowing him to say anything that was going to seem like an endorsement by the mayor's office for knocking down the church.
The mayor wasn't like, I want to knock this church down personally.
Get me my hammer. But I think that was a smart move because I honestly have no idea whether or not we could leave the studio today and the church could just be gone for all I know.
I want to talk about, since we've been talking about a bunch of old-timey weird stuff, I want to talk about these old-timey Worcester ads. We've got one for Columbus Park. Did you see this one from Columbus Park?
No.
Building restrictions ensure good residences only. No, quote, 3-deckers, unquote. Which is great. Exquisite country scenery, bird's eye panorama of the city.
Beautiful.
This tract offers the most attractive sites for homes within the city limits. City water, gas, electric lights, sewers.
In a remote part of Worcester.
They even have a sewage system, Brendan. We have Gilman Carriage Works. We have Eureka Corn, the greatest ensilage variety known.
Where'd you find these?
These are all, these are things which you can just find. Like once you hit the mother lode of Worcester ads, Brendan, there is infinite awesome Worcester ads.
It's a rabbit hole you can just
you can. These are from 2 old publications. One of them is called Worcester Magazine. No relation to the modern Worcester Magazine, but this is Worcester Magazine promoting citizenship and commerce and good citizenship, I think.
Okay.
And the other one is called Worcester Light. The Worcester Light.
Huh.
The old Worcester Magazine had one article, for example, that was called Something About Worcester, period. That was the title of the article. Maybe that should be the title of this week's show. Something About Worcester, period. One thing I wanted to ask you about, Brendan, was 75 Sleighs. Did you read this? This is my favorite Worcester ad of all time. I mean, we've got stuff for H&R revolvers. They're still around, right? Harrington and Richardson?
No, that was the company that was over on the corner of Park Ave and Chandler Street.
Oh, right.
Right where there's now it's either a Walgreens or a Brooks Pharmacy.
What's the gun manufacturer that's still around?
That's Carr Arms.
Oh, okay.
And that's a relatively new gun manufacturer. So Carr is the one that's kind of interesting because it's actually the son of Reverend Sung Young Moon from the Moonies, who owned and founded Carr Arms. Yeah.
We've got Haywood Boot and Shoe. We've got a company that makes a clothesline called the Hill Clothes Dryer. We've got Bonton corsets, infinite Bonton corset ads from back in the day. Fairbanks Model Drugstore, Holland and Havner Bike Shop. We are on the ground floor. No stairs to climb. No dangerous elevator. Private instruction in bodybuilding, fencing, club swinging, sparring, etc. Gymnasium, shower, baths, etc.
So I'm going to make a weird suggestion.
Yeah.
And I know you're having fun with these from a novelty perspective.
I am.
But I think there's something really important in here that gets overlooked a lot. I was having this conversation recently with my mother, right? And she was bemoaning still.
Well, there is something, but it's not, you were thinking of different things. So tell me
all
what
these great
thinking
things going on in the city, and my mother always loves to come back to, but there's still no retail. And I always try and politely redirect her. It's like, no, the retail that might be lacking is just what you in your later years, Mom, are reminisce about as retail, right? Like when Main Street was full of, you see old photos, like Main Street full of retailers and whatnot. But if you go down the list of things that were also available, then like you look at those old photos, half the store windows had like Kodak and Polaroid and Canon like ads, right? Like we're not bringing back the film store. Sorry, it's just that's not gonna work. Mm-hmm. Even more modern closings like Shacks. Like I said to her recently, realistically, barring somebody who just goes there out of habit, who really needs to go into Worcester to spend $600 on a well-fitted men's suit, if not more, when you can take a 45-minute ride into Boston, go to a place like Nine Tailors where they're going to take all your measurements, send them to their uncle in Hong Kong, and you're going to have a Hong Kong bespoke suit shipped back to you within a week and a half. That's like legit and going to be $350. A lot of these models just don't make sense.
This is how stylish man Brendan Melican dresses, by the way. Not today, but whenever you wear suits, you wear these Hong Kong suits, right?
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, I've got a couple off the rack that I like bringing to local tailors and whatnot. I still think there's a lot of value in a local tailor. But I think if you went through a list like this and you looked at the things that might even seem kind of goofy, these are actually the kinds of small local businesses that we should be keeping in mind when we're talking about retail development in the city of Worcester, because it's not about what's working on a national level or what's working in Auburn or Marlborough or Boston. It's what does the city of Worcester actually want and need, and what can the city of Worcester provide itself through retail. And a lot of these
like an Ed Hiders or something.
Exactly, and that's exactly the point. It's only going to be locals, whether they come from a certain segment or demographic of the population that is here, or just somebody who's here and realizes where there's a hole. You don't need to wait for a national brand to come around and fill that hole via long-term site surveying. You need locals to do it. And I think this is one of the things that we've kind of forgotten, is that there's some good ideas in here.
There are. Well, I'll tell you, the thing that I feel is overlooked, Brendan, is not that. It's this ad that says 75 sleighs at your own price. I want to read this ad
75
to you.
what?
I want to read this ad to you and have you explain to me what this ad means. I feel like this is our, by the way, Addresses the Dead episode. Explain this ad written by a long dead person. So this is sleighs as in,
sleighs.
A one-horse open sleigh.
Okay, just want to make sure we're clear. I was hearing slaves, and you were kind of making me nervous. I thought this was going to be the end of the show.
Not slaves, not slayer, sleighs.
Okay,
75 sleighs, it says in big print, at your own price. Now is the time to buy. Plenty of sleighing ahead. Indications for the next 6 weeks, cold weather and snow. Parties buying now if they wish. I will store their sleighs through the summer free of charge. With some who have no room to store, this is an offer worth considering. Buyers should buy now and save at least 20%. George C. Dewhurst, 17 Park Street, opposite the Common.
No kidding, huh? Are we talking like toboggans here, or are we talking horse-drawn sleighs?
This is like a horse-drawn sleigh. This gets into the thing that we always bring up every time that Worcester shuts down because there's like a foot of snow or whatever, and we shut the city down for a week. It's like back in the day, they didn't shut the city down. I mean, the city was really never maybe hopping so much, but they had sleighs. At least rich people had sleighs.
We had sleighs, and we also...
Snow.
To the young people sitting on the other side looking at us like crazy people now, what do you folks do when we have terrible snow in the city? Do you stay home, or do you
Yeah, stay inside.
Have you ever seen pictures of neighborhoods back in the 40s and 50s when there was a snowstorm? There were no plows, right? Like they're literally everybody in the neighborhood with shovels, and then if you're lucky, a guy who worked on a farm with a tractor moving all the snow out of the road. It's this amazing thing to see that we've all become kind of, and it's not crazy, it totally makes sense, but we've become so reliant or expecting the idea that the city's going to come through and get all the snow out of the way, and then maybe we'll go to work or school tomorrow or whatnot. It used to be, to your point, Mike, you couldn't just shut down, right? There was stuff to do. You had to keep things moving, so everyone picked up their shovel, and they weren't even good snow shovels. They were
shovels bad snow shovels.
No, they were dirt shovels, right? And just kind of go out in your best tweed and get some shoveling done.
This is another thing. This is another thing which is not based on primary sources, and for all we know, the city totally shut down in a way bigger way back in the day. This is just our.
It was one
staged
photo that I had seen once. That was
Yeah. Anyway, so I just don't really understand 75 sleighs at your own. I don't understand what at your own price means. I don't really understand.
Name your own price.
How did this guy store sleighs for people? Did he just have a warehouse? Did he just have a
benevolent sleigh manufacturer?
Did he just have
whatever?
Like a plot of land that he would throw a tarp over the sleighs? How do you?
I'm sure he had a barn. Maybe a warehouse.
You think a couple strong dudes would pick the sleigh up and like hang it from a hook or something in this barn?
Why do you think we get boats off out of the water? We're dry docking boats.
That's what I'm wondering.
We're dry docking sleighs.
Well, that's what I'm thinking is, though, if there was somebody who was selling boats in downtown Worcester and was like, I'll dry dock them for you.
Do you know anybody with horses? Maybe this is something we should start up, is a sleigh business in the winter in Worcester.
I don't know. I know people who like horses.
Are we done with this show yet?
Are we basically done with the show?
We might as well be done.
We should be done with the show. Thanks for listening to 508.
Enjoy the weekend.
Thanks for engineering the show. Good job. We'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
They don't fire us.
Next week's episode 300, Brendan.
Oh, congratulations, Mike.